Your questions, your decision. Ask the leaders on Central FM.
Nicola Sturgeon joins us on Central FM. Welcome back, First Minister.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here with you again.
Now, just before we hear from our listeners, I have to ask, First Minister, Anas Sarwar and Douglas Ross, they've been showing off their dance moves on the campaign trail. So I want to know, are we going to get the Nicola Sturgeon dance off? And if so, what is your go-to sort of dance floor song?
Well, all I can say to you is, yes, sir, I can boogie. But actually, that's not strictly true. Let's just say I was not born with particularly great rhythm, and I certainly wasn't born with a singing voice. So I think I've decided, especially that given that we live in very serious times, I'm going to leave the dancing competition to the boys, and I'll go on with the serious business of seeking to run the country. And
presumably you're looking forward to the Euros in the summer.
Very much so. I think it's good news that we're hoping to have crowds, albeit still quite limited crowds, in Hampden, and we'll be there cheering Scotland on.
We certainly will. Okay, let's get into the questions. So I'm joined by Andrew Baxter from the Central FM News team. Hi, Andrew.
Hi, how you doing?
Now, as you might expect, we've got loads of questions to get through, First Minister, so let's crack on. And it's a question about independence to begin. Who's asking this?
Hi, Nicola. My name's Matt, and I just want to know, why does it seem that independence seems to be the top priority for you? No matter how many times you say it isn't, we see news stories coming out, like last week, for example, with Kate Forbes saying that basically independence is the priority. So can you just confirm us and tell us the truth? Is independence more important than this pandemic?
First Minister.
Nothing's more important to me than getting us through the pandemic. Look, to Matt, I would say this. I've campaigned for independence all of my life, so it's hardly a secret that I think Scotland would be better off as an independent country. And of course, now around 50%, some polls would suggest slightly more than that, of the Scottish people think independence is right for the country. So it's an issue that people want to talk about. In interviews, I end up answering the questions I'm asked, which is my duty. I don't choose the topics we speak about, but people will judge me on what they've seen over the past 12 months in terms of my handling of the pandemic. I've spent almost every waking moment for more than 12 months now trying to make the best decisions I can based on the best evidence and advice I've got at any time to get the country through this as safely as I possibly can. And for as long as is necessary, that is what I will continue to do. And I'll try to be straight with people about the issues we face, the challenges we face, and how best to get through them. But once we're out of this crisis, it actually really matters that it's people in Scotland who choose the country's future, and we don't allow that to be decided by politicians, particularly politicians like Boris Johnson. What kind of country we want to be is really important, and where power lies, where decision making lies, has a big impact on that.
And just on that, First Minister, if you had to seek support from other pro-independence parties for a majority in Parliament, would you be prepared to work with the Alba Party and with Alex Salmond?
No, I'm not going to work with the Alba Party. I don't agree with their approach to independence, and I won't go into the other reasons why I'm not keen to work with Alex Salmond. But I'm campaigning in this election to win it, to win. I hope, although I don't take this for granted because it's difficult to do under the system, but I hope we can win an SNP majority, because independence aside, that gives us the mandate to go on and do the things that we need to do to get the country through this crisis. But we'll only get that majority if people use not just their constituency vote, but their regional vote for the SNP as well. In terms of working with other parties, I've done that throughout my time in government. We work constructively with the Greens on budgets, for example, and we tried to work across the Parliament on other issues. We've worked with Labour on things like period poverty. So, I'm a great believer in trying to build agreement where we can and having respectful discussion on the things that we disagree about, because we live in a democracy. People don't agree on everything, and it's about how you handle those disagreements that is often the most important thing.
Okay, another Andrew is talking about, this time, COVID support for businesses.
Hi, Nicola. Are you funding your election promises from Barnett formula cash that was intended for supporting businesses in Scotland?
Nicola Sturgeon.
No, absolutely not. Every single penny of the Barnett formula consequentials that has come to the Scottish Government because of decisions the Treasury has taken around business support has been passed on and will be passed on in full to businesses. In fact, in some respects, we're going further than the UK government funding has allowed us to do. You know, if we think about the commitment we've made to continue 100% rates relief for businesses for the entirety of this financial year, that's businesses in the leisure, tourism, aviation, retail sectors, for example, that's a commitment that the UK government hasn't made. I think they're only giving rates relief for 3 months at 100%. We're committed to giving it for 12 months. So we've gone above and beyond what we were strictly funded to do in terms of business support, but every single penny will be passed on to businesses.
I'm just admiring your collection of books behind you, First Minister. I know that's just a few of them. I know you've been back in a bookshop since they reopened, but have you managed to visit a pub or a restaurant since they reopened after lockdown yet?
I've not been in a pub yet or a restaurant yet. I've not timed that. Will all be coming, no doubt, over the next few days. It's great to see businesses of all shapes and sizes open their doors again. I've just come from a garden centre this morning. Again, you know, open again, trading again, and it's fantastic to see that businesses have really been through the mill and have been very patient for the good of the whole country. As we open up, though, we still need to be really careful. You know, we only have to look across Europe, countries like France and Germany still in the grip of lockdowns. India, of course, a human tragedy unfolding before our eyes. COVID is a really horrible, dangerous virus. It's more infectious. The new variant we've been dealing with in the last few months is more infectious than the strains as we came out of the first lockdown. So we've got every reason to be optimistic just now, but we absolutely must continue to take care if we don't want to set our progress back.
Thank you. Ali has a question about pensions.
Can I ask, Nicola, in an independent Scotland, what would be your plans for the state pension, given that under a Westminster government, we are amongst Europe's poorest pensioners?
First Minister.
So independence obviously would give us responsibility for pensions, which we don't have right now. I hope over time, as we could do this in a way that was affordable, we would increase the level of the state pension, because the comment there is absolutely correct. The UK has one of the lowest state pensions in the whole of Europe. I also am not in favour of continued increases in the state pension age, where actually we're expecting people to work for longer and longer and longer before they access their pension. I don't think that is right. I think we should give people a decent age at which they access their pension. So the key thing about independence, of course, is that it opens up these choices for Scotland that right now are in the hands of Westminster, and right now in the hands of a Tory government at Westminster that I don't think can be trusted on any aspect of public spending.
I have two questions on a similar theme here, First Minister. We'll hear them both, if that's okay. Firstly, Lorraine Martin from Dunfermline about defence jobs.
Defence is not one of the powers devolved to the Scottish Parliament. Defence spending and priorities are under the control of Westminster. As one of the biggest employers in Scotland, in an independent Scotland, how would this be managed?
And a question thank you, Lorraine. And a question from Roberts.
Hey Nicola, I'm currently serving in the British Armed Forces and living in Scotland. How would my life be affected if Scotland were to become independent?
Nicola Sturgeon.
Well, thanks to Lorraine and Robert for those important questions. The one thing to recognise is that although defence is a matter right now reserved to Westminster, Scotland pays its share of the defence budget through the taxes we pay. And if we were independent, we would fund our own defence forces. What we've seen from UK governments over the past number of years now are cuts to conventional defences and cuts to the number of armed forces personnel that there are in Scotland, at the same time as they plan to increase investment in nuclear warheads. I think that is the wrong priority. Scotland is a maritime nation. We need good quality, well-resourced, well-funded conventional defences to protect ourselves, and where appropriate to play our part in international matters as well. So to Robert, you would be, I hope, persuaded to serve in Scottish Defence Forces and play your part in keeping Scotland safe. You do a fantastic job right now at that as part of the British Armed Forces, and Scotland would have a strong commitment to conventional defences.
Thank you very much. Okay, can I just ask as well, I mentioned, I think I heard you the other day talking about you were going to be seeing your parents again after all these months. What was that like, reuniting with your parents?
It was lovely to get to see them. We had a couple of hours on a Saturday night, I think the Saturday night of the weekend, where the travel restrictions were lifted in my back garden. It was a bit chilly, but it was lovely. And just to see them, it was the first time I'd seen my mum and dad in the flesh since Christmas Day, which will be the same for families the length and breadth of the country. So, you know, I think it's one of the things that the last year has been so grim and horrible for everybody. And I'm always really reluctant to talk the language of silver linings, because I don't think there's been a silver lining on COVID. But I think if we were to wonder about anything that we maybe want to hold on to, it's that we no longer take for granted the simple pleasures in life that once we would have taken for granted. And I think it's important that as we come out of this, we do remember that we were reminded of what matters in life, and it's still quite important to hold on to that.
And honestly, do you think there will be any more lockdowns?
I with every fibre of my being, I hope not. I'm optimistic that we'll avoid further lockdowns for two reasons. We have suppressed the virus again to very low levels, but more than that, I think on its own that would not necessarily be enough to give me that confidence. But the vaccine programme is going really well, and the data from the vaccine programme so far is suggesting that it is helping reduce transmission of the virus. So that is actually what gives me greater confidence. Can I sit here right now and guarantee there'll be no need for, you know, localized lockdowns or even some measures nationally? No, I can't, because I can't foresee how this virus is going to mutate and develop and what risks it might pose to us as we go into another winter. But I think we're in a better position now than we were a few months ago, and a better position than I would dare to have hoped for, given the success of the vaccine programme.
Just on that theme, can I just ask, why have people down south been given like a little card after they've been jabbed, you know, with the type of vaccine and the date? Yet we don't seem to have an equivalent sort of record card in Scotland.
Well, I'm not sure what the purpose of that is down south. Others can answer for that. It's all electronically logged here. We are looking at, if there are decisions made, and this is a big if at the moment, to use vaccine certification, you know, for international travel or something, how we provide that in a digital online format. But the most important thing to know is if you've had your vaccine so far, or if you're about to get it soon, the person vaccinating you will record who you are, what vaccine you've had. They even record what arm you get the vaccine in. So all of that information is there, and will be able to be used in any way that we deem it appropriate to use it.
Sally, what's your question for Nicola Sturgeon?
Over the past 14 years, the SNP have wasted 4.5 billion of taxpayers' cash. This includes unfinished ferries and the delayed opening of the Sick Kids Hospital in Edinburgh. Why is the SNP prioritising another independent referendum over COVID recovery? You told Andrew Marr last weekend that the SNP has not yet done any modelling of the impact of Scottish independence on people's incomes. Surely if this election was to be the endorsement of a second referendum, as you wanted it to be, you have to treat it as such. Why have the SNP failed to provide a single idea for what a separate Scotland would look like?
First Minister.
I'm going to be quite blunt here, forgive me, but the contradiction in that question provides the answer. That question started by asking me why I was prioritising independence over COVID, and then went on to ask me why I hadn't been effectively prioritising independence over COVID. I haven't done the analysis for the finances of an independence referendum, firstly because we're not asking people to choose yes or no to independence at this election. When we come to ask people to make that choice, we'll provide the up-to-date information. But actually, the real reason and the more important reason we haven't done that is because I've been focusing on COVID for the past year. When COVID struck a year ago, I explicitly said I was putting all independence planning on the back burner to allow me and my government to focus on COVID. It would have been a bit strange, having said that and having focused on COVID, if I suddenly now unveiled all the work we've been doing over the past year on independence. So, you know, what I would say is it's really important to put somebody like me under a lot of scrutiny and ask tough questions. But it's a good idea to make the questions consistent in themselves and on their own terms. I've been prioritising COVID over the past year. And just as we did in 2014, when we come to ask people to make that choice, yes or no to independence, we'll put forward all of the analysis and all of the modelling and all of the answers to the questions that people will have. That's the right and proper way to do things. Last point on this is, you know, I did put all work on independence on the back burner because of COVID. Boris Johnson didn't do that with Brexit. He ploughed on with Brexit, you know, took us out of the transition period. And right now, businesses across Scotland are paying a heavy price for that. Our exporting businesses have lost, you know, loads of money and opportunities because of not just Brexit, but the hard, unprepared, chaotic Brexit that the Tories have imposed upon us. And, you know, it crystallises, once this crisis is over, kind of crystallises a choice for Scotland. Are we going to continue to allow Westminster governments to impose these damaging things on us, or are we going to take control of our own future and decide ourselves what kind of country we want Scotland to be?
And talking of businesses, Ross, what's your question for the First Minister?
During lockdowns, all non-essential had to close. That was fair enough. But then if you went up to the Range or B&M or shops like that, you got to browse wherever you wanted. So why was that fair when non-essential stores, small independent stores that sell some of the same stuff, picture frames, light shades, etc., all had to close? But if you walked into the Range, you could go wherever you wanted, buy what you wanted. They weren't limiting how many customers were in the shop. But then the small independent shops are being penalised just now with the new rules and still having to limit how many they come in. So why was this fair during lockdown that you could go to a multinational and spend whatever you wanted, fill in the CEO's pocket, but you can't go and support your independents who sold the exact same stuff?
Nicola Sturgeon.
Look, nothing about COVID has been fair. All of it has been deeply unfair. We've had to take the best decisions we could and strike the best balances. We've had to keep essential stores open. And yes, that has meant some stores who cross the boundary between non-essential and essential have been able to stay open. All places that have been open have had to comply with, or should have been complying with, all the rules on physical distancing and face coverings. And if any are not doing that, then they should be, you know, called to account for that. So this has been unfair for everybody. It's been really unfair on businesses, but we've had to reduce the number of places and the number of occasions where people have been able to come together and allow the virus to spread. And I feel heart sore and heart sorry for every small independent business that has had the toughest year imaginable. We've given financial support, and now, thankfully, we're in a position where we can start to open up more businesses and hopefully stay on that track.
Hopefully that's answered your question, Ross. Okay, who's next?
Hi Nicola, my name's Brenda. I am 55, mum of 4, 2 of which are female, and I have 6 grandkids and 3 of those are female as well. I'm increasingly worried about their future rights when I feel my rights at the moment are being eroded. The Gender Reform Bill and the right to self-ID has been scrapped by Westminster. I'd like to know why SNP are continuing. I will no longer, as a binary woman, have safe same-sex areas to be able to go to. Why are the SNP pushing this, without consulting women?
First Minister.
I mean, some of what has just been said there is factually wrong. And I think, unfortunately, is a sign of the amount of misinformation that goes around about this. The first thing I would say is, for as far back as I can remember, I have been a passionate, committed feminist. I'm feminist to my fingertips. I've fought for women's rights. I will always fight for women's rights. I will never support anything that erodes women's rights. And that is just something that is absolutely central to who I am and my very being. In terms of the gender recognition, we put that bill on hold again because of COVID. We have proposals in our manifesto to simplify the process of gender recognition. Right now, people can change their gender and they have to go through a process. And all this proposed legislation does is take some of the trauma and the stigma out of that process. It does not in any way affect the rights that women have under the existing Equalities Act or the protection of single-sex spaces that women enjoy right now. I believe in a country where we should support everybody to be who they are and to feel safe and included. Trans people are some of the most discriminated against and stigmatized people in our society. And I think it's right that we try to deal with some of the causes of that, whether that's the process of gender recognition or the transphobia, frankly, that still exists and exists to quite a great extent in aspects of our society. Yes, I think it is absolutely essential that women who have concerns, and I know there are many in this category, that improving the position for trans people erodes women's rights. We've got to address those concerns, but the first way of addressing them is to take away some of the misinformation. Women's rights are not being eroded, and the protections that women have under the Equalities Act are not changed by the proposed reforms to the Gender Recognition Act. And all I would say to people is, as a lifelong feminist, I would never support something that I thought was eroding women's rights. I think there are threats to women's rights out there right now. I think there are threats to women's rights from abusive men. It's men who abuse women that pose the risk to women, not trans women. There are threats to women's rights in terms of those who want to roll back on abortion rights, for example. There are threats to women's rights in terms of the misogynistic abuse that women face, particularly online these days. So there are plenty of threats to women's rights out there that we've all got to stand up against. But by and large, those are not threats that come from the proposed reforms to the Gender Recognition Act. And it's really important that we have this debate in a way that is properly informed and factually based.
Okay, thanks for your question, Brenda. Hopefully we've got time to squeeze in two more. First Minister, as a former health secretary, I know this subject will be, or always is, close to your heart. So here's Claire's question.
Hi, Nicola. I have a question regarding mental health. I'm just wondering if there's going to be more funding going into it and what you can see happening in the future to improve it.
Nicola Sturgeon.
Thanks for a really important question. So in short, yes, we will be investing more in mental health services. We've already done that in the budget we passed for this year, just before Parliament broke up for the election. We have a commitment in our manifesto to further increase mental health funding and to devote a bigger share of the overall health budget to mental health services. As well as greater funding, though, we need to redesign how mental health services work and put much more emphasis on prevention and earlier access to mental health support. One of the things we've already done is make sure every secondary school in the country has access to mental health counsellors, because particularly for young people, the earlier they get support if they have mental health issues, then the less likely they are to then need specialist support later on. So it's about more funding, but also shifting the balance so that there's a much greater emphasis on prevention and earlier intervention and community access.
First Minister, how important is it that that support is there for people who've been struggling throughout the pandemic?
Vitally important. This was a priority before the pandemic. One of the things that we've got to recognise is that there's actually a positive in here. When I was at school, you would never, ever, ever have talked about mental health problems. You wouldn't have even have had the language to do that. We now have a situation where the stigma around mental health has reduced. People are much more able to come forward. and that's putting pressure on services. So we've got to make sure the services can meet that pressure. So it's good that people feel able to come forward, but particularly given the impact of the pandemic, the responsibility is to fund the services in a way that means that they can meet that demand. And that's what we are absolutely committed to doing.
Okay, I think we've got about a minute. First Minister, if you are re-elected, which is looking very likely if the polls are right, will mean that by the end of the next parliamentary term, you'll have been in post for 12 years. I think that's a long time. In fact, my question is, are you planning to serve as First Minister for the whole of the next Parliament?
Look, elections are like job interviews. So I'm putting myself through a big job interview for the post of First Minister right now. And in no other job would you be asked the question, if you get that job, will you do it? I'm asking people to elect me as First Minister to steer us through the pandemic, get our recovery underway and drive that forward. And if people put their faith in me, and I don't take that for granted, to be First Minister, yes, I will do the job that I'm being elected to do, which is serve a term as First Minister.
Okay, thank you. And next on Ask the Leaders, we're going to be speaking to Douglas Ross from the Scottish Conservatives. Any quick message for Douglas from you, First Minister?
I think he can probably do without my advice.
Thank you so much for joining us here on Central FM today.
Thank you very much.